My grandmother read her horoscope and talked to the conjure woman to make the right tea to solve a problem. Some of my friends find peace in yoga and Buddhist meditation. Other Black folk gather crystals, turn tarot cards, and set up ancestral altars, and go to church every Sunday. Or maybe they don't, because churches condemn their practices, but they have no problem with Jesus.
Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
Welcome to Diverse Devotions, Black Belief Across Boundaries, where we wade into the waters of religious multiplicity, Black faith, and spiritual journeys. Discover what happens when Black spirituality breaks the rules of how being religious is supposed to work. I'm Monica A. Coleman, writer, university professor, ordained clergy person, and initiated EL Orisa. In Diverse Devotions, I'll lead you through a tapestry of captivating narratives and thought-provoking dialogues. We'll hear the spiritual journeys of Black folk who practice more than one religion. We'll also hear from individuals whose acceptance of different religions emanates from an understanding of laws of nature and universal spiritual principles. From the freedom of religious multiplicity to the personal journeys of transformation, each episode offers enlightening perspectives that expand the boundaries of Black belief. So, if you're a seeker hungry for knowledge, religiously devout, an educator curious to understand, or simply intrigued by spirituality's rich diversity, follow and like Diverse Devotions. Be a part of this journey, because at the heart of these stories, you'll find the spirit of freedom. I'm excited to welcome to the podcast today, Natasha Robinson, JD. Natasha is the Deputy Chief Diversity Officer and Title IX Coordinator for Roosevelt University in Chicago, Illinois. Professor Robinson is a retired criminal defense attorney, having been licensed for 25 years, 12 and a half of those years as an assistant public defender of Cook County, specializing in the representation of indigent clients charged with felony crimes. She has been an assisting teaching professor of criminal justice at Roosevelt University, where she taught courses relating to criminal justice. Prior to coming to Roosevelt, Professor Robinson was a teacher at Chicago Public School, teaching law courses, including criminal law and criminology, to high school students enrolled in the honors program. Natasha Robinson is also the creator and curator of Legaleaze Please, LLC, an online platform and digital space that empowers the development of individual and collective comprehension of criminal laws, cases, and policies through decoding, deconstructing, and demystifying legal language. Natasha Robinson is a national speaker, lecturer, writer, scholar, activist, and advocate. She has been a regular guest legal analyst on CourtTV and WGN9 News. And Natasha Robinson is a proud ministry partner of The Gathering, a Womanist Church in Dallas, Texas, and is currently pursuing a Masters of Theological Studies as a member of the Sacred Memory Cohort at McCormick Theological School. Of all of her accomplishments, one of Natasha's greatest joy is her daughter, Grace, and together, mother and daughter live life fully and unapologetically. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It is a joy to be here. Thank you.
So, the introduction told a lot about what you do for work, but I really want to talk with you about your spiritual life. And I want to begin by thanking you for sharing something that is, personal, of course, with all the listeners of the pod. So the first question is always, tell us about your spiritual life, about your faith journey, about how you identify religiously, and how you got there.
Oh, such a wonderful question. I will start off by saying that it's the spiritual life that lets me do everything else. That is the foundation. That's what keeps me from popping off in meetings or saying something that I meant, but I might, want to retract later on down the road. So spirituality is very important to me. I show up in this space and place as the eldest of 3 daughters. to my parents, my mother, who was a minister of music at our church, and my father, who was an associate pastor and then eventually a pastor. So I am also a PK, a pastor's kid. And so that is what set the spiritual foundation for getting to know God, getting to know Jesus, if that's possible, and getting to know God's people. What was wonderful is that my spiritual foundation also includes being a member of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, where at the time, Dr. Jeremiah Wright was my pastor. He is now, my pastor emeritus. And so at the age of 7, one of the earliest things that I remember seeing is a sign outside the church that said, Free South Africa. Now, I joined Trinity in 1981, so I was 7. And in my 7-year-old mind, I thought that meant if you joined the church, you could get a free trip to South Africa. I did not know.
I love that.
Yeah, I did not know that it meant free in South Africa and divesting and confronting what I learned later as apartheid. So I bring that into this space because of the fact that spirituality included not just our relationship with God, but our relationship to God's people. And to be able to speak the truth in love and speak the truth in justice, and to know that I couldn't just love God without loving my African diasporic self. So it has always been that marriage of the two, at least. And then later on in life, it became the love for womanism, which is, you definitely know, having authored, several books and been a pioneer about womanism, about how loving yourself, about how loving a community and loving God, what that looks like in that theory and praxis. Where I am right now in terms of spirituality, if someone were to say, I would borrow a phrase that I've heard from others about I'm spiritually fluid, which means that I am a Ifa Orisa practitioner. I am not a person who has been officially initiated, but as my priestess has said time and time again, a person's first initiation is through the birth of their mother's womb. And so I feel initiated in that way. I also still am somewhat tethered to the Black church, I should say the Black Christian church. But I do what is called, you chew the meat and spit the bones out. So I'm able to sit in the space and I'm able to listen and determine, okay, what theology resonates with where I am right now? And then what theology do I need to put back on the proverbial shelf and say, that I don't believe that anymore. I am a member of the Womanist congregation, The Gathering in Dallas, Texas, and I'm a member online. The co-pastors are Dr. Irene Lynn Session and Dr. Camilla Hall Sharp, and they do theology differently. They are able to incorporate different ways of knowing about God, knowing about ourselves. And so it's not Christian per se. I would say it's more Christian adjacent, where it allows us to embody God. It recognizes sacred memory. It acknowledges ancestral ways of knowing, practices, and rituals. And then lastly is I am able to say I'm spiritually fluid because of my participation and membership with Pink Road Chronicles, who is pastor. She doesn't really like to say it per se, but she is a pastor, Reverend Dr. Melva L. Sampson, who is a professor at Wake Forest Divinity School. And this is an online hush harbor where people are able to come and deconstruct their previous ways that have them thinking and rethinking about understanding what part does the religious industrial system, how that has affected us and what we need to do to be relevant and to be ourselves in the world. So all of that is the answer to your question. Like I said, a member of the Gathering, member of Pink Road Chronicles, and lastly, I will say, because of my Ifa Orisha rituals and wisdom, I am also a member of Ashe Ire, which is an online community that is committed to African spirituality and theology. So that's why I say I'm very fluid, is that, I can speak sometimes in Yoruba and other times I can line a hymn and, engage in that type of way. And this is home for me. That's home.
Ooh, I have so many questions. Okay.
Ask away.
Well, thank you for sharing so much. And it just leads to so many other things I want to talk with you about, and I'd love for our listeners to hear about. All right, so we know that you were raised in Trinity. So you're raised in a Black Christian church that has a strong sense of connection to Africa and African liberation, right? And liberation of Black people. So where did the Ifa Orisha practitioner part come in? Was this something you were also raised with? Did you encounter it later? And can you tell, I'm not going to assume that our listeners know what that means or what that involves.
Okay. All right. So I will try to do my best to explain it. And I will say that I am still a student so that I can synthesize it in my way. When I was growing up at Trinity, we always had a framework of African perspectives. So it was not just the divinity that was part of our identity. It was also cultural knowledge. It was about where are we and who are we in God as Africans in the diaspora. And so we would have every year what is called Umoja Karamu, which is a Thanksgiving feast, and where we would centralize the embodiment of the seven Kwanzaa principles, which really are, Nguzo Saba. So they are Umoja, unity, Kujichagulia, self-determination, Ujima, collective work and responsibility, Ujama, cooperative economics. I'm still remembering this as a little girl. Nia, which is purpose, Kaumba, creativity, and Imani, faith. All right. So as you can see, I'm almost 51. So I am able to still recite and embody those teachings. We also had a service where during Umoja Karamu, it would start on the continent of Africa. And it was a dramatic presentation. They would have stilt walkers, they would have drummers that would speak to other drummers by way of rhythms and sounds, invoking the spirit, invoking the Orisha. And so I'm watching all of this as a young girl. So this becomes the norm and not the exception. Fast forward to 2012, where at the time, Pastor Wright used to have these cultural sojourns. I had gone to the first one with him in 2007 to Ghana, and then I went to this one in 2012 in Brazil. That is where I had my first introduction to Orisha and to Ifa Orisha spirituality. For those that are listening, Orishas, think of them as energies and extensions of God. That's a very basic definition. These are persons who were real persons, and then they eventually became spiritual energies of God. So you have Yemoja, who is reflected in the water, in the ocean. You have Oya, who is reflected in the spirit of change through, tornadoes or just things in nature. So to make a long story short, when I was in Brazil, I was having conversations with Pastor Wright, and we saw these different Orisha that were enshrined in wood. So I'm 5'10". These statutes or wooden enclosures would go all the way up to almost 10 feet. And so I remember asking Pastor Wright, okay, well, who is my Orisa head? Meaning, who is the divinity? Who is the person that leads and guides my consciousness, my intuition? And he said, you'll know when they pick you. You don't pick them. And I was like, wait, what? And that's all he said about that. And so fast forward to 2023, I took a class about African spirituality, and I concluded the class with going to Savannah, Georgia. And when I was in Savannah, Georgia, I was told that I was going to receive my Legaleaze, which are visible necklaces, if you will, that represent different Orisa. And it happened in the Atlantic Ocean. It wasn't until months later that I found out that, in fact, that person was not permitted to do the initiation. And so I was just out here. And I felt very betrayed because I had given this money, because I had given this time, because I had believed that this person who had represented for a year, that they were who they say they were. Uh-huh. Well, I eventually found Ashe Ire online, and that is the head of that community is Dr. Funlayo Wood. And what she said to me is that it is man, or in this case, woman, who betrays. It is not Ifa. And so I had to sit with that because I was still, I told you I could pop off in a minute. That's that shock go energy, I guess. And so I had to think about that. And that is what led me to embrace the fluidity of the fact that even though there was a betrayal that occurred, it eventually led me to what would be my ultimate destiny.
Well, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, especially, the hard story, right? Because that's really difficult, particularly if, I think when you're not raised in a tradition, to be able to find, the right people you want to learn from and study with, right?
Yeah. And it's the first time that I have ever, that I did not feel the shame or the guilt that comes with, or can come with, different iterations of Christianity. I do not feel the need to perform. I do not feel the need to repent. I do not feel the need to seek someone or something outside of myself. I start internally and work from there.
Well, a question I'm asking, many of our guests on this podcast is, so what does your spirituality look like on an everyday basis, right? Or, maybe every weekish basis, right? So what does your faith look like in practice, right? Do you go to church sometimes and then other times, what happens? What happens? Throw calorie shells? Like tell us about.
So I could say with unashamed courage that I do not go to church, the physical building, anyway. And it took a long time to work through that because I'm a preacher's kid. We go to church from the rising of the sun to the going down of the same.
7 days a week.
Yeah, absolutely. 8 days if they could fit it in. And so what my spirituality looks like every day is I wake up every day and I salute my Ori, which in Ifa Orisa tradition is your sacred consciousness and conscience. It's the divinity where, according to Ifa Orisa, can go with you from the beginning of life all the way to the end before you transition into another lifetime. So I salute my Ori, I pray. Then I will, before I wake my daughter up, I will engage with my ancestors, which is no more than, having a conversation with them, praying to them, thanking them for their protection and their provision, and also seeking guidance and counsel. So it's as if, there are those who be like, well, I would never talk to dead people. Okay, well, you have, for some, you keep obituaries, you keep pictures, you keep someone's outfit, their reading glasses. All of these are things where if you put them somewhere, or you put them all together, that is, an altar. And it's nothing more than interacting with them, understanding that time is fluid. And so calling upon their presence, their guidance is something that I do. I'll listen to, some gospel music, if I need to. And then on Sundays, it involves me attending worship online, and just trying to incorporate what I have learned and what I am learning in my everyday practice. So not only am I embodying it, my daughter sees what I'm doing, and I slowly, with her consent, bring her as far as she wants to go.
I'm laughing because I know your daughter, and you must have her consent.
I gotta have her consent.
She is not. She's not like, well, just because you do it, right?
Yes, and I love that for her, because that's liberating to me, for her to be able to retain not just her identity but her agency. I think is also a form of spirituality, because it's not forced down her throat. She can accept or reject or engage in any type of hybrid that aligns with her beliefs, and whatever she chooses is fine with me. I support her.
Well, I got to ask about Jesus, right? Because for so many Christians, right, there's a kind of exclusivity around, what you must believe about Jesus. And if you don't, then you're out, right? We wouldn't call you a Christian. So tell us a bit about how you reconcile, right, your participation right, in Christian rituals and gospel music and even online church, right? With your participation in Ifa Orisa. Do you reconcile it? Is it a contradiction? How does that, do you just not think about it? Like, tell us how that, any of those are all valid.
Yeah.
Tell us how that works for you.
So I am still working through it, to be honest, because when you believe something for so long, and then you are introduced to something that ask you to believe a little bit differently, or I wouldn't say differently, more expansively, it takes some time. And so while I believe that Jesus is human and divine, I don't believe that Jesus is, quote, coming back. Now, there may be someone who may be clutching their pearls, like, oh my God, how can you even, woe unto you, Pharisee. I'm not saying all of that. What I am saying is that Jesus's coming back, I don't think is a culminating event. I think every day Jesus comes back in our actions, and how we speak to people, and how we embody justice, and how we become the hands and the feet of Jesus, how we begin to question things that maybe systems and institutions are like, how dare you? We are not to be questioned. I think that Jesus has more to do with Ifa Orisa tradition than people give credit for, because there are some things that it's like, some things that Jesus is doing in the written text kind of reminds me of a couple of Orisa, but that's a different episode. So I definitely believe that Jesus and all of who he was in terms of his cultural identity and in terms of his divinity lives in us. Definitely a person, definitely someone that came not to die for our sins, but to more so have us question, what does it mean to sin? And not to engage in the type of sin that redacts our body, that says that of this flesh is no good thing. These are things that I grew up, listening to and reading. And I don't think that God or Jesus would inhabit our bodies in such a way if our flesh was anything but divine.
Well, thank you so much. And that sounds like you really are thinking about it. So it's, of course, we're always evolving, right, in our ideas and our thoughts. But you weren't like, I don't know, just right. You thought about it, and I really appreciate you talking about, how Jesus comes back for you, right, and in your
Mhm.
now, you've said something that I think makes this such a contemporary conversation, and that is that you talked about being a part of online communities, right?
Mm.
Which is something we couldn't have said 20 years ago, right?
Mhm.
So I'd love for you to say a little bit about, the role of, online religious communities in, kind of how this works for your faith and why it works well, I presume.
Mhm. I will say that of all the atrocious outcomes of the pandemic, there are a few gems that emerge as well. And one of the things is that the entire world was on lockdown at the same time. And so, as it relates to the church, as it relates to religion and spirituality, there were certain things that had been passed off as good and as acceptable when in fact it was not. So while you had people, leaders of faith, uh, practitioners, preachers, pastors running to the internet and trying to throw, content online, it just kind of exposed not just the procedure, but also the substance. And it also caused me to think about, what do I believe and why do I believe it? What does it serve me and serve my communities for me to believe that way? And so online communities work for me because I could be at 3 different services at the same time. And I have not gotten out of bed. That's the beginning of the benefit. The extension of that benefit is for me to make real connections with people from around the world. It is a global invitation to speak with and to get to know people and their faiths, to understand that it's not so much about the answers, but the questions. And the online communities where I have been led to join have no problems with the questions. It's the discomfort of it. No, it's the comfort in discomfort. That's what it is for me. To be able to say, I don't know if I believe that anymore, or what do you think about this? Or, and to be able to have those conversations. Anyone who says, well, you can't make community online, yes, you can. You absolutely can. It just depends upon the intention of that you hold and the intention of the group, with the understanding that it can continue to evolve as you evolve, if that is what you wish to do.
Now, for you, do you ever have a chance to be in these communities IRL in real life?
Yeah, yes.
Do they sometimes find each other in person, or is it strictly online? Is it different when you are with people in real life, or just an extension of the online spirit?
So I think for me, it is the extension of the online. Now, this is not to say, because, two things can be true at the same time. I do miss, they say the fellowship with the saints. I do enjoy singing in choirs. I used to direct choirs and going to classes and things like that. However, I also know that the difference between then and now is my participation in it is out of desire and not obligation. So if I run into someone like yourself, because we met through, Pink Road Chronicles,
Right.
when we saw each other in real life, it was like, oh my God, excitement, because we're not seated, we're not in boxes, we're real flesh, real people. So I have seen different people who comprise the membership of Pink Road Chronicles at different events, at different conferences. We have forged relationships outside of Pink Road Chronicles. And I think that really speaks to the community, in that we don't need the particular event to forge our relationships with each other. With the gathering, actually, my daughter and I attended the gathering in real life last October for the gathering's 7th anniversary. And it was like a birthday party, in the sense that we were able to see people in real life that we usually see online. and we share so much. So to be able to now put a name with a face where you know these people online, but to be able to not just have the virtual hands extend in love, but actual arms, the community. It's like a big grin. I was just talking with one of my friends, and he said that two things. One is like a party every time all of us run into each other. And then secondly, as I said, he is my friend, and yet we have never physically been in the same space. And so online worship has us redefining, what does intimacy mean? And what does that look like in your life? How are you able to shed some of the traditional notions of worship and just do it differently and more expansively? So that's what happens in my life.
Well, as you know, this is not the most common way necessarily, right? That many people are religious. Um, do you feel like there are common misunderstandings about the way you express your religion that you hear from other people around you? Do you ever feel like maybe you're a minority amongst other Black religious folk or other Black folk? I'd love to hear a little bit about what you feel people don't understand.
I think it depends upon the generation in which you are. I am a Gen X, I think. So the best generation around. And so, we have people, our elders and our ancestors who have been like, look, on Sunday, you go to church, period. That's the end. My mother will still be like, you ain't going to church yet? No, Chad, no. I do believe that one misconception actually lies in the leadership of churches who are like, look, you can't feel the spirit if you at home online. Is that one, for some, there are still health concerns where people like, you know what, I realize I can do spirituality differently. Secondly, I don't have to be in a 4-hour service anymore. I can give you a good hard 30 minutes and then I'm on my way to get a mimosa. I think another thing that online worship exposes is technological injustice, where there are people who do want to worship online, but they may not have as strong a Wi-Fi signal or internet signal as, say, someone else. And so there is a particular level of privilege that I think we need to deconstruct as well. And I also would appreciate more if Black church would say, we need your money in order to do ministry, as opposed to, if you don't give your tithes and offering, then God is going to throw you into some type of hell because you're misusing God's gifts. I think to berate somebody and to beat them over the head into submission and resignation is not the way to go for online or in-person worship.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's really important. I mean, we're online right now, right? And people who are listening to podcasts, have some kind of access of that nature. So it's a good reminder about the kind of privilege, right, that we're able to have and how we have to work even harder to, to bridge that digital divide. Which leads me to a question I'm excited to ask, because you're an attorney and you have worked a lot around justice, and we know that justice matters to you from just your bio alone. What does your faith have to say about justice, about freedom, right? You mentioned your experience with with Trinity, right? It was Trinity. UCC, I saw the U first, Trinity UCC, and having this early exposure, right, to the combination of faith and liberation. Where does that still operative in your current faith journey, and what's the role of fairness and freedom and justice?
So how I grew up was always through the teachings, not just of Dr. Wright, but other teachers and leaders, in that Jesus is justice, that you can't have justice and Jesus separate and apart. And he would always tell us about stories where people was like, I don't want to hear all that justice stuff, just preach Jesus. And that would always tickle me, because it's like, wait, what? And so Jesus, I think that as it relates to an imbalance, the imbalance comes from only regarding Jesus in divinity and not a person who lived in humanity. Jesus was very much in touch with the realities of his time and the time of the peoples with whom he worshiped with, who he talked to, and who he rebuked. And so to disengage one from the other, to me, is short-sighted work. Justice is something that can show up and does show up in all of our lives. We do not have to be so-called justice leaders. It could be as uncomplicated as asking for fresh fruit and vegetables in a store. That's, food justice. It could be working with young people in school to make sure that what they consume is not toxic to their genes, to their hormones. It could be as much as students that come to school where their clothes, are dirty. And so what we do is we wash their clothes, but we do not attach shame to what it is that we're doing, which is why sometimes people do not ask for help, or they don't want justice, because justice has to be wrapped up in what you believe. And so when we're doing justice, sometimes it may be for a person who will say, I don't want your God. I don't give a damn about your Jesus. Can you help me eat? Can you help me vote? Can you get me affordable and clean housing and water? And so when we're talking about justice, while it is something that Jesus embodied and did, justice in and of itself is not something that I think needs to be worshiped as much as applied to our lives, understanding that every deed that we do, we can infuse a little justice in there. And then therefore we do become God. We do become Jesus. They may never see, someone who is painted in a particular portfolio, but they could see us. And that's the justice and the Jesus that I embody and I try to follow.
That resonates so much with me, of course, too. And, that it's your faith lived right out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And, let's say we've got listeners who are hearing you and saying, oh, okay, this really resonates. I think this makes sense to me. Where do you think they should start, right? Where would you say would be a first step someone could take as they're listening to your story and they want to learn more or begin to practice? Like, what would you tell them to do?
I would say first, sit with yourself, offer yourself grace and time and space, and begin to ask yourself a series of questions without providing immediate answers. Because we live in a society, it's like, okay, I got to figure it out right now. And I got to, no, you don't. I would say, ask yourself, what do you believe? Why do you believe it? And who taught you that that belief was okay? And then from there, when you start thinking about different things, also take note of how your body feels when you are asking these questions. So many times in spirituality and in religion, our bodies are an inconvenience where, yes, I'm so focused on having a spiritual life, but my spiritual life is still encloaked with the flesh of what it is that I live through and what I go through. So how do I feel when I'm getting ready for church or synagogue or whatever? And if I don't have a particular faith, how do I feel about that? Because there are great people who are atheists or agnostics. And so we need to make space for them and say that their lived experiences are not invalidated solely because they don't engage in the faith and spirituality that others may engage in. So I would say start there. Start with the questions, and then start with the feeling of your body, because your body knows. Your body is not going to lie. If your body tenses up, if you start to get dry mouth, if your fists start to clench, that is probably not a place where you need to be, because those are actions of those who are on the defense. If you are relaxed, if your shoulders are not up by your ears, if you leave that place in person or online, but you want more, and you find yourself doing more research or talking with more people outside of that experience, then that may be something that you can continue to pursue. And I would say, lastly, you always have the right to change your mind. So if you find that something does not fit, you can explore something else, or you can make it fit to your liking, and it is okay.
Now, I've just got to push back on this just a little bit, not in terms of what you're saying, but there are so many people who would say, we're not supposed to base our spirituality, our spiritual truth on what feels good to us. We're supposed to plug into the will of God, right? And we align ourselves to God's will, right? So many people might still have that voice saying that. How would you respond to that, right? Because what you're saying could just be so anathema to the idea that it's not about what makes us comfortable. It's about how we plug into God's bigger plan.
So I would say that because I have been that person that'd be like, what are you talking about? If it's not in the will of God, you can forget it. Because the Bible says, and then I would just, go on and start quoting different things. To that person, I would say that the purest sign of faith and of spirituality is the activation of your agency. That's what I would say. And so, yes, God has a will depending upon where you fall in that. What does it mean for God to have, God's will? But I think that sometimes we put God's name in and on things, and God is like, hey, homie, that's not what I'm worried about. And so I don't think in this stage of my life that God is overly concerned or offended by me joining with God, me being able to say, this is what I'd like. And one of the things that I have learned in my years of being in religion and spirituality is that some of us enjoy religion and spirituality, but we do not enjoy joy. Joy and pleasure has no place in spirituality and religion. And if you should find yourself enjoying something or engaging in pleasure, from hell will you lift your eyes. You are engaging in fleshy things. And unless you hit these check boxes, don't do that. And so I don't think that the God that I know and I love and the God that loves me is saying, forsake things that I put in you. So, I mean, I didn't just create joy because it's not inherent. It's something where if I am to believe that, there are destinies and things like that, I feel like my relationship to God, because God created me, is about, well, tell me what you think. And then let's work on it together, as opposed to a dispossession of agency in order to, stay loyal or stay obedient or stay in the will of God. I think it should be my will too. That's how I feel.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that and for, responding even to, what other people might be hearing in the back of their minds, right? As you're sharing about what you think is most efficacious. Well, you're a teacher and right, and you're a mentor to others. I'd love to hear you share just about one of your spiritual mentors. Who have you learned from and grown from, and how has that mentor or spiritual teacher impacted you?
So I would just, reiterate the names that I have spoken of earlier. Dr. Jeremiah A. Wright Jr., my parents, and when I say my parents, they taught me what to do and what not to do, what to carry forward, and then what to release, so that it does not incur generational trauma. Reverend Dr. Melva Sampson, who at that point introduced me to so many different people, yourself included, that my interactions with her, with Dr. Irie Lynn Session, Dr. Camilla Hall Sharp, comes back to, wait for it, an Ifa Orisha divination or reading, if you will. And the person who divined, for those that are listening or watching, to divine is to seek guidance from spirit, from Orisha, from the ancestors, and there are different ways in understanding how the person for whom you are divining aligns with their destiny, their decisions. And it's not necessarily a fixed roadmap. It's more of a, if I were you, if I were to consider this, have you considered these things? And so with the person with whom I was with, when they divined, one of the things they said to me was, your sisterhood is coming. And at the time, I was confused because I already had a so-called sisterhood. And so it took years after that reading to fully lean into the fact that I could appreciate the persons who had always been teaching me something. So I knew what to do that worked for myself and community and what did not work for me. And then when I begin to get free and liberated in those areas, then people like, yourself, people like Dr. Chakia Amin, all of these persons that are not just authors whose books I have on the shelf, but, and I should say, and that my daughter, my 7-year-old, calls, aunties and uncles and loved ones, because she's seeing all of these spiritual leaders love on her and then love on us collectively. And so there are different ways in which I'm saying, whatever you decide, but you decided in this framework so that you can carry that on. And I have, my bonus dad, Dr. Jeremiah Wright, to thank for that, because he taught one of the biggest lessons for me, which is about loving God with my mind, my body, and my soul, and not at the expense of any of them. And to love my neighbor as I love myself, which is about loving myself. And so I think about Intishaki Shange when she says, I found God in myself and I loved her fiercely. That's where I am. That's my truth, is to understand that the Bible is not the only sacred text. It is but one. And so to read literature, to read history, and to understand that people are also sacred texts. Those are the lessons that I have learned in just being in community with the people that I've shared with others.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I've got to laugh because in true womanist fashion, I'm like, tell me about one person. Let me tell you about 5 people, right? And right, just you're so communally minded in the way that you approach your faith, and I think that's truly wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming by the podcast and sharing with us. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you, where they can learn more about you?
Yes. So right now I'm hiding in plain sight. And I say that because I am a seminarian. So I am, everything came about in 2024 at around the same time. I'm attending McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago. I am with, my institution doing that work. So right now, what we know as Legaleaze Please is under construction. and it's under construction because there are things that I need to fine tune in order for the full thrust and impact of my call to come forward. If you want to email me, you can email me at legaleazeplease@gmail.com. That's LEGALEAZE, and then please attach it to a PLEASE@gmail.com. Legaleaze Please is named that way because it is about taking the knowledge of legal language and legal information and making it so that it is accessible and understandable. You can also follow me on social media platforms. And when I say follow, what I really mean is connect. I don't want you following me because I will lead you astray. I want you to connect with me on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to be on the Book of Faces. But what I will say is that the email is the best way, and social media is an additional way.
And I will make sure all of that gets into the show notes.
Yay!
Well, again, thank you so much for your time and for your vulnerability and sharing. And to our listeners, stay tuned for our next episode. In the meanwhile, keep listening, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep breaking the rules for how religion is supposed to work. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Diverse Devotions, Black Belief Across Boundaries. I hope today's conversation has sparked something in you, whether it's a question, a new insight, or simply a deeper understanding of the many ways Black folk engage with spirituality and religion. Remember to check out the show notes for more resources. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe or follow, rate, and share to help others discover the power of diverse religious experiences. We'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment or send us a message about your thoughts and experiences at diversedevotions.com. Until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep breaking the rules of how faith is supposed to work.